Welcome back, viewers. You are still tuned into Prime Live. Now, images from your screens today will reveal the devastating images that are coming out of Gaza. And that is because Israel has officially ended its ceasefire and has resumed its genocide in Gaza. Now, we now see that 356 civilians have already been killed and the number continues to climb. We are joined this evening by Bilal Bassiouni from the Center of Africa and Near Studies to discuss this topic further. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for joining us on Prime Live.
Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullah. Thank you for having me.
I mean, these are some of the most devastating images that we have seen coming out of the last few days when it comes to the genocide that is now continuing on in Gaza. Now, Bilal, last time we spoke to you, we were able to analyze the impact that Donald Trump will have on the Middle East. And we now have seen that Yemen has been bombed, and we also see now that the genocide in Gaza has been resumed as well. What do you think has happened? What has happened to Trump, the so-called peacemaker?
So we've anticipated that Trump will bring in a destabilizing effect coming into his second term. And the idea that Trump is a peacemaker is actually quite a contradiction in the conventional sense. He's always operated as a transactional deal maker who equates dominance with stability. So often this is misunderstood or misinterpreted as a person that fosters peace, but he's more about imposing order through power plays, rewarding allies who align with his vision, while punishing adversaries with overwhelming force. So the resumption of the Gaza offensive, the bombardment of Yemen, and the unrestrained escalation of violence across the region shows that any pretense that Trump, the peacemaker, if you want to call it so, was always a mirage built on momentary deals rather than any forms of long-term solutions.
I couldn't agree more. That is a very fair observation when it comes to President Trump and his so-called, so to say, peacemaking abilities, or rather what he has put forward in the media. Now, when it comes to the disruption that is taking place in the region, we are also seeing the US's war on Iran. Can you talk to us a little bit more about some of the dangers of their presence in Iran, and what can we anticipate from this action as well?
So, similarly, the rhetoric of a US war against Iran is highly dangerous. But from my understanding and the way I see it is that it's more of a pressure tactic at the moment than an imminent reality. So the US and Iran have been engaging in brinkmanship for years, with escalations and retaliations carefully managed to avoid full-scale conflict, particularly from the Iranian side. But the danger lies in miscalculation, and if either side oversteps, which could spiral beyond control. With a volatile player such as President Donald Trump coming into the picture, this creates more opportunities for miscalculation and events that could spiral quickly. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not Afghanistan. It is a formidable military, has deep regional influence, and a network of allied militias across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, which could strike the US and Israeli interests if they are not taken into consideration. So a direct war would most certainly trigger a regional conflict with Iran, and would draw in those actors from the different regions in the Middle East. And also Iran could retaliate by disrupting the Strait of Hormuz, which the US understands would be a critical disruptions to global oil routes, sending energy prices soaring, which President Donald Trump is unlikely to take responsibility for such activities. So it's something not to completely disregard, but the imminency of an US-Iran war over the coming few weeks or months is probably unlikely.
I mean, that is very devastating news to hear, but thank you for sharing that observation as well as that insight with us this evening. Now, as you alluded to earlier in the conversation, is of course we did predict that eventually Israel would violate the ceasefire, or the ceasefire agreement rather. And of course, what Israel has said is that they are justifying the ceasefire violation based on wanting to release the hostages. And the strategy, of course, has not worked at all. And do you feel that the intention from Israel was always to violate this ceasefire agreement?
So the justification for breaking the ceasefire around hostages specifically doesn't stand up to scrutiny, if you think about it. The military strategy has not only failed, that, we've been witnessing the military strategy, as you've been demonstrating on your screens, for the past year and a half. And the military strategy has not only failed to bring the hostages home safely, but has also actively endangered them. And we know a number of these hostages have been killed directly through Israeli airstrikes. So if retrieval was the priority, negotiated exchanges, which had already proven success since the ceasefire came into picture, would have been a more logical path. So instead, the return to full-scale bombardments suggests that the hostages were never the central concern, but a pretext for continuing the war indefinitely. The timing of the resumption of escalations or the bombardments cannot be separated from Israel's domestic political scene. So Netanyahu continues to face mounting domestic pressure, not just from the right-wing hardliners demanding for continuous war on Gaza, but also from a growing public discontent over his leadership and over the handling of the war and over the hostage situation. So his corruption trial is also not going anywhere, and his grip on power is becoming increasingly fragile, which provides now the war would provide a critical political shield for him. So the longer the conflict persists, the more he can delay accountability, the more the public shifts away the focus from his administration and away from his legal troubles. So maintaining the emergency unity government that he currently has, that suppresses his own government. So there's much more going on around the reactivation of the bombardment on Gaza than just around hostages. I think that's safe to assume.
Thank you for clarifying that information for us, and also for sharing that very vital insight when it comes to, of course, the resuming of the genocide that is taking place in Gaza. Thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of us were, of course, in the dark when it comes to those details and information. So thank you for sharing that. Of course, it is extremely disappointing news to hear that. And, the fact that the genocide is back in full force is extremely disappointing. But what I also want to talk about this evening is, when it comes to retaliation, do you think that Hezbollah in Beirut will also resume military operations against Israel?
I don't think so. In a nutshell, Hezbollah has been really battered over the past 14 months in terms of its engagement with Israel. It has drained its weapon stockpile, has resulted in deaths of key leaders, including Hassan Nasrallah. But still, Hezbollah remains a potent force, right? I don't want to disregard that. Its current strategy appears more focused to rebuilding its capabilities and preserving its political influence in Lebanon, rather than reopening a front a front that it cannot sustain. Particularly given the terms of the November 2024 ceasefire that Hezbollah agreed on, were mostly seen as succumbing to the conditions of the war, and hence are unlikely to re-engage with Israel if not forced to do so. So for now, the group will likely continue its measured, symbolic engagements, occasionally rocket fire, possibly also cross-border incidents, and rhetorical support for the Palestinian resistance without committing to a broader escalation. Hezbollah understands that an all-out war could not only cripple its already weakened forces, but also destabilize the whole of Lebanon at this stage. So I think Hezbollah will likely calculate staying out of the war going forward. It's in its best interests.
Absolutely. Now, for our viewers in the Durban region, we are drawing close to the time of iftar. We do hope that you enjoyed your fast today, and may Allah accept from you as well. The graphic is up and you can see that it is officially now the time for iftar has set in the Durban region. To all our viewers in Durban, may Allah accept your fast. But now to resume our conversation, Bilal, I want to talk about, before we let you go, we know that Americans have cancelled foreign aid or have pulled back foreign aid when it comes to, supplying arms to Israel. However, Israel has received close to $4 billion worth of bombs as well as other military hardware in US tax dollars. What is your comment on this?
So that demonstrates a contrast, right? So it's a decision to cut foreign aid across the board while funneling nearly $4 billion US of military support to the Israel. This is not just a matter of policy. It's a deliberate political statement. It reflects Trump's administration's prioritization of hard power, and that we've discussed in both our first interview and this one, over diplomacy, reinforcing just generally the idea that the US alliances are transactional and are based on military alignment rather than humanitarian or economic cooperation. For Trump, foreign aid is always seen as wasteful unless it directly serves American strategic or ideological interests. So in his worldview, supporting Israel's military dominance is non-negotiable pillar of US foreign policy. And not just Trump, but this is an established US policy position. While aid to other countries, especially those not offering immediate geopolitical returns, is really just expendable. It also exposes, in another sense, the deep inconsistencies in how the U.S. justifies its foreign spending. So while aid to other countries is framed as a financial burden, military support for Israel, for instance, is packaged as an untouchable commitment. So even when it funds controversial actions that damages the U.S. The United States credibility on the global result. So Trump's policy reinforces the growing perception that, and this growing perception is becoming more and more validated and widespread, not just in the global south, that U.S. foreign aid decisions are dictated more by domestic political calculations and ideological alignments rather than strategic necessity or global stability.
Bilal, thank you so much for joining us this evening, for sharing your insights and observations as well. It was a very, very informative conversation, and thank you for joining us once again on Prime Live to leave us staying informed when it comes to all things Gaza and the now resumed genocide in Gaza. Thank you so much for joining us and for your time this evening.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Viewers at home, that was Bilal from the Center for Africa and Near Studies. Our conversation today was, of course, centered around the now resumed genocide in Gaza, as well as U.S. relations and what they have to do with all of this that is going on. I hope you feel informed. I hope you feel a lot more incited when it comes to all things that are going on in Gaza, as well as the possible violence and destruction that could be taking place between the U.S. and Iran as well. But do stay tuned and stay informed. We will continue to have conversations like this and keep you informed and updated as well. But on that note, it is time for us to head over to a quick ad break and we'll come right back.